Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today's webinar about the Funeral and Allied Health Services Program and the Funeral Arranging and Directing Program. My name is Megan McDonald. I'm one of the student recruitment coordinators here at NSCC, and I'm excited to be delivering some great information for you today with help from our faculty member about these two program options. So let me share with you first the plan for the day, and I'm going to start today with a couple of important acknowledgements. First off, we have a land acknowledgement. NSCC is located in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory and traditional homeland of the Mi'kmaq Nation. Our relationship is based on a series of peace and friendship treaties between the Mi'kmaq Nation and the Crown dating back to 1725. As treaty beneficiaries, we recognize that we're all treaty people. And now I have an African Nova Scotian recognition to read. NSCC recognizes the African Nova Scotians as a distinct group who arrived here 400 years ago. From that time on, they've contributed to the infrastructure and economic wealth of the towns and cities they've helped to build, but from which they could not benefit. Let us learn more about how our respective communities were shaped by the historical contributions of African Nova Scotians to Mi'kma'ki. So we're really pleased that you could join today. For those who are watching the live session, you are welcome to send your questions in throughout today's info session, and you can do so with the instructions we have on the screen here. So in the GoToWebinar software, you'll see there is a questions box, just like we've got a picture of here on the left, and you're welcome to start typing in questions as they come up. Although if you have questions later on, maybe we end today and there's something that you are still wishing to learn, or if you're watching this as a recording later on, if you found it on YouTube or on the NSCC website, you're welcome to email us with any questions that you have. So that email address in yellow, recruitment@nscc.ca, is where you can direct those questions. And just note that the information that we're sharing with you today is accurate as of today, our recording date, which is April 30th, 2025. So if you are watching a recording of this in the future, just check back on the program pages and ensure that there weren't any changes made to any of the program information that we're sharing with you today. So I'm very lucky today to be joined by a faculty member from both of the funeral programs, Lisa Smith. Lisa will be sharing information and her expertise about the programs. And so we're going to be chatting about both of them today. We'll give you an overview about what you can expect. We'll talk about admission requirements and answer any questions that you have towards the end. Welcome, Lisa. I'm glad that you're here. How about I'll start off with just talking about some of the details for the program, and please jump in if there's anything that you wanted to share. So the next intake for both of these programs is this coming September 2025. And note that these programs are unique in that we don't have an intake every year. So this coming intake, September 2025, the next expected one will be September 2027. They both take 2 years to complete. One's a diploma, and arranging directing is the certificate. And you can see there's a bit of a difference here in delivery. Funeral and Allied Health Services is considered a full-time program, and then Funeral and Arranging Directing is considered a part-time program. And they both have classes that are happening online through eCampus, and Lisa will explain a bit more about this in a moment. You'll see the admission requirements on screen as well. So we need to see that applicants, when they're ready to come into the program, have either their high school diploma or equivalent. And there are a number of ways to meet that equivalency. I can always help walk you through those options. And this is a big one. Because of the licensing structure of the program, you must be someone who's living and able to work, do your apprenticeship in Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, or Newfoundland and Labrador. You're going to need a Class 5 driver's license. So that's a typical driver's license to drive a car. And there's also a letter from a funeral home that's required where you're currently employed, stating that you've secured an apprenticeship. And Lisa can expand a bit on that as well as we go through. Now, if you're an international student, note that these programs are not eligible for a postgraduate work permit. So that's something to consider when you're looking at program options. So we've got a couple of requirements here, and this kind of talks about what you'd need after you've been accepted to the program and you're making your way through. So at the beginning of the program, you're going to need to provide proof of application for registration for the apprenticeship that you're doing, or the apprenticeship license. And that's something that you connect with the provincial licensing board for. And if you do have any questions specifically, you should check with your provincial licensing board because sometimes the rules are a little different province to province. You'll also see that you need a current official criminal record check as well as a vulnerable sector check. You don't need to get those at this stage yet. They do have an expiry date on them, so I'd recommend waiting until you get more information from NSCC about that requirement before going and paying for those checks. And then you can see that there's a first aid requirement and some immunizations that are required. Lisa, was there any info that you wanted to jump in with and share?
Well, Megan, you shared some great information about the program details and the differences between the two programs. I would mention that because the diploma program is considered to be a full-time program through the NSCC, that it is eligible for student loan funding. However, because the certificate program, funeral arranging and directing, is considered to be part-time studies and delivered over 2 years, it's not a program that's eligible for student loan funding.
That's a good thing to note. And so they're both the same duration, right? Students are studying for 2 years. It's just the frequency of like schoolwork that they'd be taking on, correct?
Exactly, and because both programs are apprenticeship model programs, although it's part-time studies because of the number of courses for funeral arranging and directing certificate students, they're really apprenticing full-time like their colleagues in funeral and allied health services, but it's just the number of courses and courses that are common between the two programs. They're delivered at the same time, and so students from both programs would be together in those courses that are common between the two curriculum documents.
That's nice that they get to meet each other because of course they would end up being future colleagues once heading out after graduation.
And sometimes they're working at the same funeral home during the program, so it is nice to have that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into some specifics. Lisa, do you want to give us a bit of an overview about funeral arranging and directing, and then we'll move into allied health services?
Sure. So as I mentioned, there are courses that are common between the two programs, and students enrolled in funeral arranging and directing are apprenticing as funeral directors specifically, and the courses that they're taking reflect the types of activities and knowledge that would be required for them as funeral director apprentices and then future licensed funeral directors. So we'll see a list of courses for both programs, and so as one can appreciate, courses that might cover arranging or directing of funeral services, and knowledge of different religious beliefs and practices, as well as law and ethics pertaining to the profession would be covered as part of this program.
And can you chat a little bit about the apprenticeship piece, because it's such a significant part of the experience, right, of students who are studying with us?
So as you mentioned, one of the program requirements for students who are starting is that they're registered as apprentices with their provincial licensing boards. And so they need to provide that proof at the start of the program. Because it is an apprenticeship model program, they're applying the learning to practice while they're taking the courses through online delivery. And although the delivery is asynchronous delivery, meaning that they're not scheduled for a particular class at a particular time, we believe that it's important to provide opportunities for students to connect in real time with faculty. And so we schedule sessions weekly, typically on Tuesday evenings, and when available, we encourage students to participate. Because they're working in funeral homes and schedules often preclude participation, we record those sessions and include them in the courses that they're taking so that they can review them at a later time. And they're taking their courses through the Nova Scotia Community College, but they're registered with their provincial licensing boards. And we do have applied learning courses where Students will track their progress in their apprenticeship at the funeral home and participate in learning activities that they'll report on in their Brightspace courses. But the apprenticeship piece is specifically through the provincial licensing boards.
Sounds good. And I think this is a question that we get often, with my team in recruitment about how the kind of evaluations happen in programs. I think often when we think about school, we think about maybe writing exams or writing essays, but it sounds like in these programs, it's really more about the hands-on kind of experience and performance and apprenticeship. Is that the case?
That is the case. And so as part of the applied learning courses, their reflective practice assignments, their checklist that students can complete to demonstrate their application of learning, as well as skill development through their program and through their apprenticeship. And we encourage mentors to provide feedback and to work with the apprentice to establish some learning goals to increase learning experiences and competency in specific areas of practice.
I know you were mentioning a little bit about the courses and how in some cases there are overlapping courses in both of the programs. We've got on screen right now the courses for semester 1, 2, and 3, so the entire program there for year 1 of 2 for funeral and allied health services. Is there anything, Lisa, you wanted to highlight?
So the first semester courses are great foundation courses for other courses that students will take throughout the program. And courses like anatomy, physiology, and medical language may be courses that applicants to the program have taken through other learning programs at other learning institutions, and they may request to submit an application for transfer credit. So that's certainly a possibility. And I will mention at this time that the courses in the program have a minimum pass mark or a minimum competency of 75%. Because the pass mark on the licensing exams that students will take after they graduate is either 70% or 75%, depending on the province where they're challenging the licensing exam. So these first semester courses provide a really great foundation for courses that will come in the following semesters. And so courses like anatomy, physiology, medical language, microbiology, and pathology foundations are a good foundation for embalming practice. And in semester 2, the first embalming course, Embalming Practice Essentials, is offered. Funeral service law and ethics that's offered during the first semester is going to apply to all areas of practice, whether funeral directing or embalming throughout the program.
Sounds good. Let's take a look at year 2.
So building on the knowledge and learning from year 1, students will take advanced courses. So Embalming Practice Essentials was in year 1. In year 2, Embalming Challenges and Restorative Procedures. And in the first semester of year 2, there is that Restorative Art course that provides that foundation for the Embalming Challenges and Restorative Procedures course. And as I should mention that we have 3 semesters. Obviously, the third semester is a shorter semester, so it's typically a short 5-week semester, so there are fewer courses that are offered. And in that final semester, there's funeral service management practices and the applied learning 6 course. So students who are in the current cohort are preparing their graduate portfolio for review at this time. And with the applied learning courses, all of the learning activities that they participate in really help them to build the portfolio requirements. So it is a learning college portfolio, and each applied learning course includes reflective practice.
Right, so students end up with a a real collection of all of the skills and training that they've had that they can reflect on and reference back, I imagine, as well.
Exactly. So it's always an exciting time in the year to be able to review the portfolios with students to see how much they've learned and the skills that they've developed.
So moving on to the next program of the two we're talking about today, funeral and arranging and directing. So being a part-time program, we can see this course list is shorter than what we were just looking at. And here is what we've got for the first year. Do you want to chat a bit about these, Lisa?
So all of the courses that we see on the screen in front of us are courses that are common with the curriculum for funeral and allied health services as well. So I had mentioned funeral service law and ethics, psychosocial aspects of death and dying is an important first semester course. And during year 2, students will build on that knowledge and experience, and they'll take issues in grief and bereavement for funeral professionals. The funeral arranging and directing applied learning practicum course that we see in semester 2 is one of 3 applied learning courses for this particular credential. So there's one in year 1 semester 2, and then there's one in year 2 semester 1 and year 2 semester 3, or sorry, year 2 semester 1 and year 2 semester 2. That's a tongue twister. So there are fewer applied learning courses due to the number of courses that are part of the credential. And because the applied learning is specific to the practice for funeral director apprentices.
And when we're talking about semesters, just so everyone has an idea of what that timeline looks like, semester 1 typically running from September through towards the end of December, middle December. Semester 2 would be January through to kind of mid-April, and then semester 3 would kind of pick right up and end towards the end of May. Is that right, Lisa?
That's correct, and that's a good point to make about the duration of the semesters. Because this is an apprenticeship, well, both programs are apprenticeship model programs, although courses, the NSCC courses end for the academic year at the end of May, the apprenticeship in funeral homes continues because students are not only meeting their college requirements while they're in the program, but they're meeting the provincial apprenticeship requirements. So courses end at the end of May, the apprenticeship continues, and the documentation of applied learning experiences will continue as required for the provincial licensing boards in meeting the apprenticeship and then licensing requirements.
And so would those apprenticeships often extend all through the summer?
Yes, they would extend through the summer. And because the tracking of apprenticeship requirements and the registration and approval of apprenticeship registration is through the licensing board, if the student apprentice has not met all of the apprenticeship requirements at the point in time where they've met the college credential requirements, they may need to continue on in their apprenticeship for a few months to meet those provincial licensing board requirements.
Okay, yeah, it's 2 parts, right? It's the NSCC requirements and then the licensing requirements.
It is 2 parts, yes. So when students graduate from either funeral arranging and directing with a certificate or funeral and allied health services with a diploma, they still need to meet the licensing requirements and go on to take either a written exam and a clinical or practical exam, depending on the province, in order to meet the licensing requirements. So the NSCC does not issue funeral director and embalmer licenses. It's the provincial licensing boards that do.
Mm-hmm. Right, so the program's really all about preparing you for that licensing exam and helping to secure employment.
Exactly.
So here's year 2 of that part-time study frequency. Anything you wanted to highlight on this page, Lisa?
So again, these courses are common with the Funeral and Allied Health Services program, with the exception of the applied learning courses. And as I mentioned, courses in year 1 are often foundation courses for courses that are offered in year 2. So the law course and psychology course and contemporary rites and rituals and world religion courses are all good foundation courses for courses that are offered in year 2, and certainly support the learning in courses like funeral service business practices and the applied learning courses where students are going to apply the learning in the funeral home.
Speaking of applying the learning in a funeral home, and of course beyond, after the school portion ends and heading off into the career begins, what kind of career options are folks looking at if they were taking funeral and allied health services with us?
So as students in the program, the applied learning requirement must be met through a funeral home because it is an apprenticeship model program. They're registered as funeral director and or embalmer apprentices. And when they graduate with their NSCC credential, they're eligible to take their licensing exams to work as licensed funeral directors and embalmers. And there are funeral sector related occupations that consider a license as a funeral director and embalmer to be an asset in applying because of the foundational learning and clinical experience that embalmers have. They may be interested in applying to work in a hospital or a university laboratory, or they may work for a crematorium or a cemetery, work in monument sales, or work for an embalming chemical company or supplier. Now, a license may not be a requirement, but having that foundation in funeral service is certainly considered to be an asset. So there are often graduates who work in funeral service for a number of years and then apply for positions based on their skill set in these other areas. But for work in some of these areas, that license may be required or considered to be an asset.
Yeah, lots of different opportunities across the sector then. It's interesting to see all of the places where folks can go. So if we're talking about career options with funeral arranging and directing, what kind of similarities or differences do we see?
Certainly a number of similarities. I had mentioned working as a crematory operator, that funeral director license is required. And then there may be some additional education or certifications that are required, such as a crematory operator certificate that would be training that would be offered within the sector by different trainers outside of the NSCC.
And so when we're looking at the cost of these programs, we've got 2 different tuition rates here, and they're a little bit different simply because one program is full-time and one program being part-time. And we've got domestic tuition rates listed here, because remember when I was saying international students, it's a program not eligible for postgraduate work permit. So that with the residency requirements, we're typically seeing domestic students taking the program pretty exclusively. So for funeral and allied health services, full-time, you're looking at $3,620 per year. And then for funeral arranging and directing, that part-time cost per year is $3,346. There are additional fees and additional costs on top of that to consider. If you'd like to see a full breakdown of all of those costs, you can head to the program fee page on nscc.ca, and then you'll be able to see everything when you're planning for your budget and your year of study. We've included some of those additional program costs here. because these are really unique for each of the programs that we have here at the college. And so important, of course, for your own planning when you're looking at student loans or scholarships, or just, making a budget for yourself. But I also think that they're kind of interesting to look at because they do provide you some insight into what your kind of experience will be in the program. So you'll see here, we have some costs for textbooks. We've talked a lot about the apprenticeship portion, so you see a registration fee there, some first aid training that needs to happen. We also need students to have a computer that they can use that would meet the requirements for the program. So there's an estimate there in case you needed to go and buy one. Also a bit of money set aside here for workshop travel and accommodation. Is there anything here that you wanted to highlight, Lisa, in terms of what students can expect or what they should plan for?
Having an awareness of the registration fee for apprenticeship is important, as well as some associated costs with the criminal record check or vulnerable sector check. In some jurisdictions, there's not a charge, but it's important to be aware that there may be a charge. And the workshop travel and accommodation line is included because they're often national and Atlantic conferences with professional development sessions that are available for students to attend at a reduced registration fee. And if those sessions are in the area, it's nice to have that opportunity to attend. But because it's asynchronous delivery, again, we don't have specific times when people need to either be on site at a campus or to attend an event, but those opportunities are often available either every fall or every spring for students to attend.
Great.
And I will, before you go on,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Wanted to mention specific to the apprenticeship registration. Megan covered all of the information about admission requirements, but because this is an apprenticeship model program and registration as an apprentice is required to start the program, being aware of registration timelines for applications is important, as well as the minimum age requirement for registration as an apprentice in one's respective province. So for most provinces, the minimum age requirement for registration as an apprentice is 18. And so it's important to contact the provincial licensing board in your area to learn more about the apprenticeship requirements.
And so Lisa, if if someone who's interested in the program contacts their provincial licensing board and finds out that, say, the required age is 18 and maybe they're not turning 18 until October or November this fall, are they able to begin the program even though they wouldn't yet qualify for an apprenticeship, or would they need to wait until they meet that requirement and can officially register?
So that's why it's important to contact the provincial licensing board to determine what the application deadlines are. So for Nova Scotia, for example, application deadline for students starting in September would be August 1st. And then that license would be issued like in 30 days time. So if there are any questions about age requirement or timing, certainly contact the provincial licensing board and please reach out if you have any questions. Please reach out and I can answer any questions that you might have. Feel free to send me an email. And I think you provided my email contact information at the beginning of the presentation. It's also available on the college website. So yeah, any questions like that, please reach out.
Yeah, perfect. And if anyone, if your email comes to us in recruitment, we're always happy to connect with Lisa as well. It's good to note, I think, as you mentioned, that the the provincial rules, there would be some similarities, but also some unique differences between. So it's certainly for everyone to reach out based on where they're located. Another opportunity to consider with this program is that we do offer a transfer agreement opportunity between funeral and allied health services in particular. So that one option has a transfer agreement with Bachelor of Applied Management program at the University of New Brunswick in St. John. So if you were interested in completing the program at NSCC and then later going on to do a business related undergraduate degree, that's something that you could look at. All of these requirements, they're a little different. We have them for many of our different programs, but what they often look like is 2 years of study at NSCC would transfer over to the university partner, and then you'd be able to jump typically into year 3 of their undergraduate program. They're all a little different. We'd be able to kind of contact UNB and just look up the specifics for this particular transfer, but just can be an exciting option to think about if maybe you have if that's part of your plan and a goal that you would like to set. So talking about becoming a student, first off, I think, checking out the program pages, it's wonderful that you're watching this now, you're getting some more information there, and also connecting with your provincial licensing board if you do have any questions that are maybe outside of what we're covering today. And then when you're feeling ready to go, you should apply online. There's that $40 application fee. This is all on the NSCC side anyway. But of course, there's the apprenticeship portion. We can kind of cover a little bit more if you had questions about that. Once you've been accepted, you've done that online application, you've provided all of the required documents, including that letter from the funeral home where you've secured an apprenticeship already. In order to accept your program seat, you pay a $200 tuition deposit, and then we send you more information and details about your classes beginning this fall. Classes would begin in September. Applications to NSCC programs are reviewed in the order that they're received. So there's always a benefit to you applying sooner rather than later, as we'll move through those applications in date order. But that being said, we don't have application deadlines, so you're welcome to apply kind of anytime you'd like from now until the program picks up this fall. But certainly encourage you to apply as soon as you're ready to do so, as you want to give yourself the best chance at having a program seat. So we're on our last slide now, and I can see some questions have come in through the chat. So I'll open that chat up and read them aloud, and Lisa and I can answer those questions for folks who are writing in with them right now in this live session. But also note, you're welcome to email us in recruitment. We can always connect you with Lisa that way. And if you're watching this as a recording later, of course, feel free to email any questions to us like that.
So Megan, before we entertain some of the questions, just wanted to speak about the application. So although one of the admission requirements is providing confirmation that an applicant has secured a position with a funeral home, that they're eligible to apprentice with that funeral home, we realize that not all applicants may have that connection to a funeral home or may not currently be employed by a funeral home. So you're here today because you have an interest in learning more about a career in funeral services. And if you don't have that connection, we encourage you to contact your local funeral home. Arrange to have a conversation or a meeting with the funeral home manager to learn more about a career in funeral services. And although an observation period is not an admission requirement, completing an observation period certainly helps you to make an informed decision about a career in funeral services.
And Lisa, so would an observation period be simply like you're spending a few days on site at the funeral home shadowing an employee?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so on the programs page, we do have under additional information. You can click on the additional information tab, and there is a document that provides a little bit of direction about contacting a funeral home, and also provides some direction to the funeral home manager about the types of experiences that would be helpful for applicants to be able to make that informed decision.
Sounds good. There's a couple of people who've noticed an oversight on my side when I was putting together these slides, so I will fix this for our recording that is posted online later, is that we forgot to add New Brunswick to the list of acceptable provinces where people can be based. So Lisa, that is true, right? Folks in New Brunswick are also eligible to join the programs?
That is true. So students from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Currently, students from New Brunswick or applicants from New Brunswick are eligible to apply to funeral and allied health services. The current legislation in New Brunswick requires that apprentices apprentice as both funeral directors and embalmers.
Okay.
So there in the very near future, there may be that change where you can apprentice as a funeral director, but not apprentice as an embalmer. But the current legislation, so for the September 2025, anyone considering applying from New Brunswick would apply to funeral and allied health services.
Okay, so if they were interested in funeral arranging and directing, that isn't something they could do at NSCC? Do I have that correct?
If they're going to apprentice in New Brunswick. So New Brunswick apprentices under the current legislation for incoming students in September 2025 would apprentice as funeral director and embalmer apprentices.
Okay, so it's sort of combined, it sounds like.
It is, yes.
Those skills. Okay, perfect. All right, apologies to New Brunswick. I will fix that when we are going forward with sharing this more widely. All right, we've got someone with just another question about apprenticeship, which I think is good to dive into a little bit more, just because there might be a few questions around it. So this person is asking, do we apply for an apprenticeship before we apply to NSCC? Or is it just that there's a letter saying that a funeral home will take you on as an apprentice?
That's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide that clarification. So the provincial licensing boards will require that you have been accepted to the program in order to apply for registration as an apprentice. What you're providing to the NSCC admissions office is confirmation that you have made arrangements for, you have secured, you have been offered a position within a funeral home, and that you are eligible to apprentice with that funeral home. But once you are accepted into the program, then you can apply to the licensing board for registration as an apprentice. And I would ask just if the person who's asking the question, are you from Nova Scotia or from another province in Atlantic Canada?
Oh yeah, good question. If you, Emily, if you want to let us know what province you're writing from, we can share that. Oh, from Nova Scotia.
From Nova Scotia. So Emily, if you have secured a position with a funeral home in Nova Scotia and you've applied to funeral and allied health services, you can submit your application for funeral director apprenticeship before starting the program. It's a little bit different licensing system, and I don't want to cause confusion, but Emily, in your particular case, if you've secured an apprenticeship with a funeral home and you're eligible to apprentice with that funeral home, you could submit that application only for the funeral director apprenticeship at this time. You have to be accepted into the program for you to apply for the embalmer apprenticeship. So I'm talking specifically about Nova Scotia.
And Lisa, would that then be maybe a different kind of scenario? We have a similar question, but with someone who's saying that they're based in New Brunswick. Would it be the same kind of procedure where they're, talking to a funeral home, they have a funeral home who's agreed to take them on as an apprentice, but hasn't, formalized that yet with the registration with the apprenticeship agency? So the order would be get the letter, apply to NSCC, and then be able to kind of submit documents to get registered as an apprentice?
So the order would be to make contact with a funeral home, either either you're an employee or you've made contact with a funeral home, you've had a conversation about a career in funeral services, you've maybe been able to complete an observation period to learn more and to make that informed decision. The funeral home agrees that they will take you on as an apprentice while you're in the program and to support you to meet the provincial licensing board requirements. The letter is provided confirming that you have secured an apprenticeship. So you're not registered yet. You have secured an apprenticeship. You're going to apprentice at that funeral home. You get accepted to the program, and then you apply to the provincial licensing board. You complete the application. The person who's going to be your licensed mentor at the funeral home completes the sponsor paperwork, and you confirm that you are enrolled in an approved funeral services program that's been approved by the provincial licensing board for a credential and training. I know that's a lot of steps, but it's securing the apprenticeship is part of the admission requirement. That does not mean that you're registered as an apprentice with the provincial licensing board.
Right.
That's the
Yes,
next step. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, important distinction. It's the intention is there to take you on as an apprentice.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have a question from someone about an observation period, which I believe they're not referring to an apprenticeship, but rather an observation period. And they've been in contact with a local funeral home in Cape Breton, and the funeral home said that they would need to contact NSCC first. And I wonder if this is sort of maybe a connection to an older admission requirement. Is there any need for a funeral home to request, say, information or permission from NSCC before allowing someone to spend some time in an observation period?
So I think you're right. This question from the funeral home probably relates to previous admission requirements where the application was required and then documentation would have been sent out from NSCC admissions relating to an observation period. So for the person who's interested in completing an observation period, who's reached out to this funeral home in Cape Breton, please click on the additional information tab on the website or send me an email. My email address is lisa.smith@nscc.ca. So send me an email and I can send you a copy of that form that you can share with the funeral home. So that information provides the funeral home with information about the expectations for apprenticeship and the fact that expectations for an observation, but that it's no longer required. So that information would certainly be helpful and would reassure the funeral home that there's not additional documentation to come. Okay.
Do you have any advice or guidance about finding an apprenticeship, approaching a funeral home?
Mobility is an important consideration, or perhaps going outside of the area where you're living to make contact with a funeral home to complete an observation period. And in securing an apprenticeship, mobility is an important consideration. So if you live in a town with 4 funeral homes and 2 are fully staffed and not currently hiring, and the other 2 have apprentices at this time, they may be willing to take you on to complete an observation period or have a conversation with you about a career in funeral services or training as an apprentice, funeral director and embalmer, but they're not able to take you on as an apprentice at this time. There will likely be funeral homes outside of your area that have position vacancies and would be interested in taking you on for an observation period or potentially taking you on as an apprentice. So when exploring a career in funeral service, mobility is an important consideration because at the time of your application, there may not be positions in your area.
Mm.
In contacting a funeral home to arrange for an observation, it's important that you call, introduce yourself, see if you could arrange to have a conversation with the manager about a career in funeral services. You may want to start with sending an email introduction, and don't be discouraged if you don't get a response right away. Funeral home managers are very busy, and sometimes it might take reaching out a couple of times over a period of time before you're able to arrange a meeting or you get a reply to your email. And I would encourage you to not open with I'm trying to find an apprenticeship. You want to be able to make an informed decision about a career in funeral service. So if that funeral home is not hiring and your opening line is, I'd like to arrange an apprenticeship with you, you may not get a reply, or the reply may indicate that we don't have any openings. So start with your interest, learn more, and be able to make an informed decision. A career in funeral service, like other helping professions, is based on relationships. So don't just make the phone call and ask about an apprenticeship. Send the email, introduce yourself, call, arrange for a meeting, and have that in-person communication if possible.
Good advice. Thank you, Lisa. We've got a few more questions coming in, which is fantastic. A few people are wondering, is the apprenticeship a paid position, and how many hours a week are people typically required to be at that placement?
And that's a really great question. There are different apprenticeship arrangements. The majority of apprenticeships are full-time paid positions. And so an apprentice would be a full-time employee. There are also part-time positions. And so the number of hours, sometimes part-time people work more hours than full-time people if they're on call. And there are also mentorship arrangements where the apprentice does not work full-time at the funeral home, but meets the requirements for apprenticeship, and they're paid for the hours that they're there, or they're on call for a period of time, but it's not officially a full-time or a part-time position. But the majority of positions with funeral homes are full-time paid positions, and with full-time positions at a funeral home, that could be 35 hours, 40 hours. If the employee is on call, that would mean additional hours during the week. And obviously there are different schedules depending on the funeral home. So somebody might be scheduled on a scheduled 9 days on and 4 days off, depending on the funeral home. But because it's an apprenticeship position and it's full-time, the majority of students are working full-time at a funeral home.
And are those apprenticeship kind of schedule-wise, is it the kind of role that you find yourself in 9 to 5, or do those hours sometimes go into evening or beyond?
Often student apprentices, like their colleagues at the funeral home, would be on call. So you may be called out during the night if a death has occurred to make a transfer. You may be working evenings if there are arrangements scheduled, or visitations, or transfers. So typically not a 9 to 5 position.
We've got a question about the courses that we shared, and we had credit hours listed beside all of those courses. And knowing that this learning is asynchronous and online, with those credit hours, are those just estimates of how long a learner will spend in that particular course, or are students expected to log the number of hours somehow that they're spending on all of their coursework?
So with the theory courses, those are hours that are attached to the courses that are delivered over 14, 15 weeks. The applied learning courses, that's the hours attached to those applied learning courses. That's a minimum number of hours to meet the learning outcomes and objectives for those applied learning courses. For apprentices, those hours don't even come close to the number of hours that you would be applying the learning through your work in the funeral home as you meet your apprenticeship requirements. But it's the minimum number of hours in meeting the learning outcomes and objectives for the course.
Okay, so the actual time that folks are spending can vary. It sounds like a bit person to person, but it's a good guideline anyway to
Exactly.
as a beginning. Okay. Great. Let me just take a quick look through. I know we've answered lots of questions, and I really appreciate everyone sending these in. Okay, here's the one. So if someone does the funeral director program first, arranging and directing, is there an option to add in later the additional courses that are required for the Allied Health Services program?
Yes, so if somebody graduates with a credential in funeral arranging and directing, and they practice as a funeral director, and a later date they decide they would like to work toward their embalmer license, they can apply to the Funeral and Allied Health Services program. And because the NSCC recognizes prior learning, and if the curriculum has not changed, we would look at the credits that the applicant has earned as part of funeral arranging and directing, and they would be credited toward the other credential. And there is a certain percentage of courses that can be transferred, and that number at the moment escapes me. I think it's something like 75% of the courses, which certainly falls in line with the number of courses that additional courses that a student would take. But yes, the short answer to the question is yes, you could apply, and you would have transfer credits and recognize prior learning credit and take the courses that would be required to meet that additional credential.
And we've got a couple of questions from people about driver's licenses, as that's part of a program or an admission requirement rather. Lisa, do folks need to have their full, it's a class 5 or a G license is another way we talk about it. Do they need to have that full license by the time classes start in September, or could they be working towards it, maybe getting that final license later in the fall?
So it is an admission requirement, and again, depending on the province, it may also be an apprenticeship requirement. So for one of the requirements for eligibility to register as an apprentice, I appreciate their different licensing classifications and graduated licenses from province to province. And I'm beyond that point of understanding those changes provincially for people who are newly licensed. So that's a great question for the admissions team, but also to check with the provincial licensing board to determine what the requirement is specific to the license classification.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to pass along any questions that are maybe best suited for admissions. If you want to email them to recruitment, we can route them that way. My understanding in a general sense with admission requirements is that you don't always need to meet them at the time that you apply, but you typically need to have them by the time the program begins. So there might be some nuance here that we can help admissions fill you in with, but if you wanted to send that via email, we can help track down a more specific answer for you. And it looks like the last question that we have coming in before we wrap up is specifically about cremation. So I'll read this aloud to you, Lisa, and please offer your input. If considering funeral and allied health services, and given that cremation is a larger portion of current services, would you recommend trying to apprentice with a funeral home with a crematorium? Or if the funeral home you're apprenticing with outsources the actual cremation, is there an opportunity to hands-on train during apprenticeship for cremation? Which might mean, I imagine, spending time at a crematorium or another funeral home.
Well, that's a great question. There's certainly a number of funeral homes that operate crematoriums as well, and the operation of a crematoria requires a funeral director license in most provinces, with some additional training as a crematorium operator. And if you're working at a funeral home that does not operate their own crematorium, but you're making transfers for cremations that have been arranged, you can certainly learn a lot. And actually that's one of the learning activities in the law course, is learning about the operation of a crematorium and having an interview with the crematorium operator. So there's a lot to learn and a lot of benefits of working for a funeral home that does operate a crematorium. But you can certainly learn just as much about the operation if you're working at a funeral home that doesn't operate a crematorium, where you're making those transfers, and you can learn more. So typically, based on the provincial licensing, a crematorium would not be able to take on an apprentice, but if you are working at a funeral home that has a crematorium, you can certainly learn a lot about that operation and may be able to participate in tasks that don't require that funeral director's license.
Wonderful. There have been so many great questions. I really appreciate everyone who's sending these in. I'm going to sneak one more in before we say goodbye. This is kind of circling back to the driver's license question. Lisa, is the driver's license that we require as part of the program, is that a license that will allow people to drive a hearse, do, say, limo transportation for a family, or would something additional, any kind of additional training be needed to drive those vehicles?
For the funeral home vehicles, the Class 5 driver's license will allow the licensee, licensed apprentice, to operate vehicles as part of their work at the funeral home. Now, as somebody who perhaps is observing or completing a period of observation, the funeral home insurance may preclude you from being able to operate those vehicles if you're not working at the funeral home. So that's an important consideration.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Lisa, thank you so much. I have learned a lot, and I really appreciated and enjoyed hearing you share information about your programs. Thank you to everyone who's been watching and sending in questions. It really, I think, has been a great opportunity to share information and learn more about all of these opportunities. So once again, if you have questions, feel free to email us in recruitment. We can always route your questions to Lisa or to our admissions team as well as needed. And really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, and I appreciate everyone's interest in a career in funeral service. Appreciate your presence today and the great questions that you've asked.
Wonderful. Well, we'll sign off. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.